Hello. Today I wanted to show how I set up a pretty awkward part on my milling machine, and how useful some of the screw jacks and clamps and stuff that I have can be when trying to hold an awkward part like the one I got shown here in the video. I don't know, 5 or 6 months ago I did a series of videos about rebuilding a clamshell bucket, and I'm currently in the middle of rebuilding 2 more. And one of the jobs I have to do is to machine this piece, and specifically this surface. This surface tends to be bowed, and it bolts to the frame I make for the clamshell buckets, and the mating surface on that frame is flat, and when I go to bolt it down to this, it's going to distort the frame. So what I want to do is machine that surface here and get it flat, so that when they bolt together there's no distortion on the frame of the clamshell bucket. I have, in one of the clamshell videos, there's a short bit of the video that shows this machining taking place. The machining itself is pretty basic, it's just facing a flat surface, but it was the setup that took me a long time to figure out. And at the time I just got some planer jacks off of eBay and some heel blocks, adjustable heel blocks off of eBay, and some 246 blocks off of eBay, and I needed all of those actually to be able to hold this successfully. Without them I never would have been able to hold them with the other equipment I had. So it was a bit of a stroke of luck that I found these, and I actually bought them without knowing that I was going to be doing this part. It was more of a fluke that I happened to have them. So I guess it goes to show, when you have a jobbing shop and you don't know what kind of work is going to come through the door, it's always good just to have lots of different tools, and it just gives you more opportunities to fixture it properly. Like I said, I'm doing 2 of these, so I've got one here. This is the one I'm going to set up. I've got it hanging off my crane. I've got it hanging fairly vertical. This is the surface that'll be machined. When I was first thinking about how I was going to hold this, I thought that maybe I could lay it down here and have this surface facing up and horizontal, and then machine it with the vertical head on my milling machine. But there wasn't enough headroom, so I couldn't do it that way. I thought that maybe I could hold this piece in my large lathe and swing it and face that surface flat, but it also wouldn't fit in that lathe. It's just too big. The only way it would fit is how it's hanging on the crane. But at the time I had no idea how I was going to try and support that on the table. I'd actually thought, when I was doing the job, that I may just put some spacers in between the bolts here and here, just to hold these apart so it wouldn't distort the mating part. Anyways, in the meantime, while I was thinking about all that stuff, I got the planer jacks and the 246 blocks and these Armstrong adjustable heel blocks. And like I said earlier, I wasn't planning on buying these just to do this job, but once I had them I realized that I could probably do this job. So the main way of supporting it is you have to create you have to hold it by this surface here. The bottom surface is flame cut, it's rough, it's a terrible surface to try and mount anything to. The only thing that's close to flat is this, but it's quite a bit higher than the table, and this has to sit on the table. It can't sit over the edge because it'll interfere with the feed control and the hand wheel. So the bottom of the table has to be under this surface. So I need to get something that can support this and that I can clamp down onto it. And it turned out that these planer jacks sitting on top of the 246 blocks, they're not quite extended out high enough yet, but when they're extended out, they provide a good surface for this to rest on. And then I can place clamps above that and clamp down onto this. And the nice thing is you can adjust this and the clamp until you get it the right height and exactly where you want it, and then everything's snugged down tight, and it makes it actually quite a rigid setup, which you need because I'm facing it with a 6-inch face mill with carbide inserts. There's a fair amount of tool pressure there, so you need a pretty rigid setup so you can take a half-assed decent cut on this. Anyways, I will just put the camera down and see how it goes. Now, one thing I don't want is I don't want this rough flame cut surface down here to touch the milling machine table, because if I have to clamp it, I'm sure one of the sharp edges will dig into the table, and I don't want that damage. So what I've done is I've just taken a clamp I have, and I'm just put it down, and it'll sit on that, and that'll just protect the table. And it also results in this having 3-point contact. It contacts here, and it'll contact on this jack, it'll contact on the other jack, and that'll be sufficient to give a rigid setup. The way this is hanging on the crane, center of gravity is over on this side, so when I try to take weight off the crane, instead of it rolling forward and sitting on the jacks, it wants to tip backwards. So I'll have to keep weight on these back straps and then just pull it down with a clamp. So I'm going to set up my clamps. So I just put it was quite a tall setup, so I've had to join some of the studs from my clamping kit together with a coupling nut. And I have these adjustable heel blocks. These are the ones I got off eBay. I didn't even know this style existed till I saw them on eBay, and the guy had 6 of them for sale. So I bought the whole lot, and the good thing about them is they have a serrated surface, and it allows you to adjust them in increments of 1/4 of an inch, which when you're working at this size of stuff is you know, fine enough. They've got a rounded top so that if the clamp sits at an angle, it's you know, always has line contact. It's not sitting up on a corner or anything. And then you just loosen the bolt so these disengage, slide up to where you need it. When you clamp it together, they end up, you know, you can't squeeze these down because the serrated teeth interlock, and the bolt actually does very little work, just holds them together. So they're really well designed. They're nice and heavy, so they should last forever. Now, this is the clamp bar, and I want to put it on, you know, something like this. But I want to make sure that when I'm pushing down, I'm pushing directly on the jack. And because this is a flat surface and the bottom of the bar is flat, you're not always sure. If you're at a slightly different angle, you might be pushing here or back here. So one way to get around that is just to take one of the flange nuts, put it over the jack, and then just set the clamp bar on the nut, and then it has to push in that location. Now, oh, look at that, I don't have enough height on my studs. That's close though. Well, I'm gonna have to rig up something different. Those are my two longest studs. Okay, so it turned out I needed so much stud height that two of my longest studs held together weren't enough. I had to actually join 3 studs together. And I think it's gonna reach. Oh, we'll see when I go to raise that heel block. Okay, that should work. Should be enough stud length. Okay. So it needs to come down a bit more. Yeah, that's starting to. It's not quite over the jack. You want to get the center of the jack and the center of the nut lined up so it's pushing in a straight line. I think that's probably pretty good. And then there, now that side is snugged up, but the other side I haven't done yet. But I just wanted to make sure that these, looking down the face, you can see that it's pretty close to vertical. So the height of our assembly here shouldn't change much. So now that I got this side figured out, I can just go over and do the same thing on the other side. And then once I got that set up, I can do finer adjustments to bring this as close to vertical as I can. I'm also going to have to put a long stud in here up with a clamp that'll reach from here. I'm going to have to put a pin in. The one I did for the first clamshell bucket actually had pins in it, and I was able to put one of these clamps in sort of like this and have it reach from the frame to the pin. And then with a long stud down, I was able to put some weight with the studs on here again, so that at my 3 points of contact, the 2 jacks and this clamp, I had force directly over them, so that that a setup would be rigid. I don't really want to induce any bending into this part, although it's pretty hefty. This is pretty thick stuff. I'm probably not going to bend it much. It's always better to not clamp over air, as they say, so you don't induce any kind of bending, and it helps to make everything rigid that way. So what I'll do is I'll set up this same clamp over on this side, and then I'll get the long stud and get that set up, and then I'll show some of the adjusting to get it lined up. If we look down along the face, and it's not perfectly flat by any means, but where I am right now, I'm not sure that's going to show up in the camera, but where I am right now, the far corner is lined up with the table, edge of the table, and we can see that this corner is back a bit. I need to knock this piece forward on this end. Up. Well, I think that looks better. What I'll do is first you just sort of rough it in by eye, and then I'll mount a dial indicator on the face of the column, and then I can run the table back and forth and the knee up and down, and I can try and get it lined up parallel to the table and vertical to the table surface. Parallel will be a little tough because the part's bent, so I'll just have to sort of average it out. But up and down, I don't think it's bent quite as much this way, so the up and down should be a bit easier. I do remember from the first one though, it's a bit time consuming, all the little adjustments you have to make. But that's what you have to do when you have a part this awkward. So thought we might get a better view of putting this clamp on from up top. I don't have a pin that'll go through here, which was how I did it on the previous setup. So I've come up with a different way, and like most of these things, it just comes down to what you have laying around your shop that you can use. And I've got some of these heavier bars that are left over from a job I did a few years ago, and they've been very handy as clamps. Those two there. I have a T-nut down in there already, and I have a length of 5/8 threaded rod. I bought a few of these when I got my clamping kit, so I'd have the ability to make long studs if I needed them for situations like this came up. It's going to be a little bit long, but I'm not going to bother cutting it off. I'd rather just leave it a bit long. So if I need it long for a different job in the future, it'll still be long. Lined up with the spacer down here, so I'm over it. And what I'm trying to do is shift this clamp back as far as I can, and this one as far forward as I can, and have the stud as far forward that way as I can, so that the majority of the clamping force is in line with this piece and the clamp. Prefer not to have the clamping force be out here, although again this part's pretty rigid. If I'm not clamping directly over the clamp, it's not the end of the world, but you know, you always try and get it as good as you can. Unless it, you know, trying to do that causes some type of secondary problem that's even worse than the first problem you're trying to solve. But that should be good. So now I can snug this one down. I should be able to release the crane. Now, hanging this off of 2-inch C-clamps, and it took a little bit of trial and error to get it so that this thing would hang straight. So now that I got it figured out, I'm just gonna put marker marks around the anvil ends of the C-clamps so I know where to put them the next time when I go lift this thing off. Lift off straight. Saves the buggering around in the future. More Armstrong tools. This has become a bit of an Armstrong job. I got Armstrong C-clamps, Armstrong heel blocks, Armstrong planer jacks. Wow. They made nice stuff. Type of C-clamps you buy in a hardware store are C-clamps in name only compared to, say, these Armstrong ones. So there, it's on the mill. It's sitting on 3 points, and now it's, you know, I haven't really reefed it down yet, but it's pretty solid. Don't speak too soon. It's pretty solid. And now I can, with the 2 jacks in the front, by tapping around this way, and then raising and lowering the jacks in the front, I can get this front surface as close to parallel with the table and vertical to the table as I can. So I remove the minimum amount of material off this when I machine it to flatten it out. Because that's essentially the goal. You want it flat, but you want it to be just flat so you don't weaken it too much. Well, I've set the dial indicator up on the part. To use my large dial indicator, I bought one of the kind of the biggest one I could find. I think if any of you guys watch Brian Block's videos, he has the large Monarch lathe. I believe he's got the same one. He had to buy it when he got his big lathe, and I was in the same boat when I got my big lathe. My regular sized dial indicator stands just wouldn't cut it. They just don't have the reach. So this one's been pretty good. Whenever you got to go a long ways, it fills the void. Anyways. So what I've done is I've set it up. I got it at the far end and it's zeroed. I'm gonna adjust this way first because once I have that lined up, when I go to adjust it this way, I think it'll have very little effect on this movement when I raise and lower the jacks. Now what I've done is I've put the indicator along here because I think this piece will be straightest when it's close. It'll be straightest where it's touching this web here. This is pretty heavy, and it'll probably have the least amount of distortion along here, so I'll use that along here to dial it in straight. appears we're within 10 thou from one end to the other. There's quite a hump in the middle, as I expected, but each end, the low spots, are now parallel to the table within 10 thou, so that should be close enough. So the part is sitting like this, so I need to raise the jacks to get it to tilt back. Too much. Okay. Well, 10 thou difference on vertical. Close enough. I'll just snug everything down and then we'll